Hello lovely people. I spent the month of June reading lots and lots of queer books in celebration of Pride. I just thought I would run through them and tell you my thoughts on all of them.
Sophie vlogs.
My plan is to go through it in the order in which I read them, so I'm going to kick things off with Now You See Me, Lesbian Life Stories, edited by Traies. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I thought this was wonderful. It is split in two sections that relate to sort of ideas like nobody saw us, innocence and ignorance, always like that, wives and mothers, stuff like that. It is based on essentially research that Traies did while she was at university. She collated all of these oral records and created this like archive that was just like real people's lived experiences. And then what she has done is that she has curated for each of those subheadings, you have about 3 records that are people telling you their life story that has sort of been edited by her. So it's sort of told to you as if it is like first person, they're just speaking directly to you. And each person, like, you really do get a sense of them as individuals, like their own way of telling the story is really preserved. I found this a really, really emotional read because I feel like a lot of the time when I read non-fiction to do with queer history, a lot of the time it focuses on like particularly notable people, like public figures and that kind of thing, or maybe they might be like an academic look at a certain identity and how it's represented and that kind of thing, whereas this was really just a bunch of real women who lived real lives, just telling you about their lives, their hopes, their fears, the trials, the joys. And I feel like there's something so special about preserving the stories of people who came before us whose voices are not always heard. So these are like lesbians from like, a lot of them were born either before the Second World War or during the Second World War, so they're of a particular era that maybe is not particularly, we don't have a lot of voices always from that time because that was something that they had to hide, and a lot of them, one of the things that is focused on in this is also sort of like the challenges of aging in this particular generation where one of these people's partners has dementia, and sometimes she forgets that she's out and that she has a partner because she is remembering a time period where that wasn't possible, and stuff like that. Some of the challenges that arise as you age, feeling loss of community, or sometimes joyously building a community at age 85. There were just so many moments in this that honestly, like, frankly made me cry. The final story is the story of these 2 lovely women who are now married, and but when at the time that Traies did her original research, they nearly refused to talk to her because they were so afraid of coming out. But now they got married in front of all their family and friends, and the way they talk about it is genuinely makes me want to cry right now. So I'm going to stop talking about this book, but I just would recommend this so highly, just as like a remembrance of real people's life. And there are so many different experiences in this, and it tries to explore like the nuance of lesbian identity in some ways, and I just thought it was wonderful, and it makes me really emotional. I followed that up with Beyond the Gender Binary by Alok Vaid-Menon, which is part of the Pocket Change Collective, so it's just a really small little look at like non-binary identity. It's a very good like primer starter point. Like, that's the whole point of the Pocket Change Collective, is that they are sort of very much starter points. So I wanted to read it because I am always looking to sort of challenge my binaristic thinking and make sure that like the non-binary friends in my life, like, I'm doing everything I can to support them and use like whatever language they prefer and stuff like this. So I definitely think this is a really great little like start point from anyone who is interested in like learning more about non-binary identity. There's a great bit at the back where Alok sort of includes classic argumentative points that they have been faced with and then sort of rebuttals against them, which I think is potentially really helpful if you are a person who wants to challenge some of the things that people in your life say. The natural critique of this would be that like it would be great to have more and to take some of these arguments further, but that is sort of like the nature of Pocket Change Collective. Then I moved on to some fiction with In the Watchful City by Qiouyi. This has been very divisive. I've seen a lot of reviews on BookTube that did not like this. I really liked this. This is absolutely my jam. This is everything I like to read because it's like stories within stories in very interesting science fiction, like fresh ideas and stuff. We follow Anima. I have to say Anima because I read another book that I will talk about in a minute where one of the main characters is called Amina, and if I muddle them up, that is why. A are an extrasensory human, and part of Air's job is to like monitor this society. There are other extrasensory humans who are also doing this, and A sort of respond to crises and kind of like are charged with keeping this society safe and all of that. One day, this mysterious outsider sort of enters where A live and is like, has this cabinet of curiosities and asks M to pick an item and then tells them the story of that item. And through doing this multiple times, it sort of causes Anima to question so much about her existence. And also sort of these stories are not stories, they are real stories that have happened to other people in this world. So you sort of get to flesh out this concept of this place Aura, how it came to be, through these glimpses of other people's stories. I feel like it is exploring so many things that are things that I like to be explored. The back literally goes like borders, power, diaspora, transformation, and I'm like, yes, it's definitely doing all of those things. Some of these, I feel like the nature of this is kind of, again, a similar critique to the thing, whereas because it's very short, and these are sort of essentially short stories within an overarching story, there's definitely aspects where you're like, God, I wish that was fleshed out a bit. I really wish we could explore this topic more. I want a better understanding of this. But at the same time, I personally just really enjoyed this like experience. It's deeply queer, it is wonderfully like evocative with some of its visuals. Obviously some of these little short stories worked a little better for me than others, there were definitely ones that I preferred, but on the whole, like, this was just a really exciting read for me, and I really enjoyed just like these ideas that were being explored. So definitely an author that I would like to read more of for sure. The book that had a character called Amina in it, I read on my Kindle, which I don't currently know where that is, but that was Seafire by Natalie C. Parker. Just before I talk about this, I need to say that how I had heard it talked about was like sapphic pirates. I do just want to mention that that's kind of not really what this is. I will say that in the sequels it might be that some of our main characters are queer. It's just that wasn't super clear to me in this first book. There is one side couple who are together, but again, based on reading a bunch of the reviews of this book, that is something that some people, like me, I did pick up on the fact that these two women are in a relationship, but a lot of people actually missed it entirely, so it is quite subtle. Again, might be a much bigger part in the sequels. I haven't read them, I can't say, but I did just sort of want to mention because I didn't want to, I felt like I was hooked in by sapphic pirates, and that wasn't entirely what I got. Essentially, we follow Caledonia's Styx, whose parents are sort of part of this resistance movement against this guy who sort of like controls the seas. He abducts children, he drugs them to make them loyal to him, and then he like sort of has a reign of terror on the oceans. She feels very responsible for the murder of her family because of some stuff that went down when she was a child, and so her and her best friend, who are the only survivors from their family ship, have formed this crew that is all girls, and they are like fighting back against it. There's a lot that I liked about this. I love the concept of this like all-girl pirate crew. I really liked the real like sisterhood focus. I gave it a 2 stars because for me it just sort of like fell down at a lot of really crucial points. One of which being is that very early on they take on this boy who is a bullet, who is a member of one of the enemy crews, because he saves one of their lives, and so they sort of keep him, and sort of everything to do with his plotline was so innately predictable based on like YA common tropes that I just found myself a bit bored with that aspect of it. Also, some of the world building was very cool, and there were aspects of this world that I found inherently very intriguing. I don't fully get all of it. Like there were things that I wish were explained further, like some of the technology that they have versus some of the limitations that they have. I found a bit strange. Like they have access to all of this like solar technology and stuff like this, but they don't really seem to have like a lot of like long range radios and stuff like that. Like I don't know. I just found some of this world building a bit odd, and I didn't really get parts of it. Also, like Caledonia as a main character, on the one hand I like her because I enjoy like her spirit and that kind of thing. On the other hand, she is so absolutely ruled by her grief and her feeling that she is her guilt, that so many of her actions, like, A, were extremely predictable, and then also B, were like illogical, but they only make sense if you like she lets her guilt rule her over like all of the advice of her friends, and I just, like after a while you're like, please. So like I feel like I personally feel like I'm not going to continue this series because I appreciate the potential that it had. I just felt like there were some pretty core elements of it which I can imagine would just be more present. Like Caledonia presumably will remain our main character, and I will remain having the problems with her that I have, and I will remain not being rooted in the romance at all and stuff like this. So I'm kind of just going to like leave it. But I didn't hate the reading of it. I just gave it 2 stars because there were just so many elements that I was like disappointed in, I guess. After that is Diary of a Provincial Lesbian by V.G. Lee. This is riffing off of Diary of a Southern Lady, which I haven't actually read. No, Confessions of a Southern Lady. Confessions of a Failed Southern Lady? Something like that. I haven't actually read it yet, but it is on my sort of list to read. But also seems very like, if I was to describe what the like tone of this book is it's very like Bridget Jones. It's like a diary entry, and it's like starts at Christmas and ends the next Christmas. We follow Margaret because she's keeping the diary as her relationship with her long-term partner Georgie sort of falls apart, and Margaret has to sort of pick herself up together again. But it's set in southern England, and a lot of her friends are very like characters, and there's sort of a look at like small town lesbian life and that kind of thing. I thought this was perfectly fine, and I enjoyed it. I think part of it is that it takes a while to lead up to sort of like the relationship breakdown, and it's so patently obvious that Georgie is looking for the exit. It's really nice to see her build herself back up again, but there are also moments when her friends sort of like walk over her a bit that you're like, why do you take this? Why do you let yourself be like this? So there was a while for like the first like half of this where I wasn't like fully invested in it. And then there's like a point where Margaret really does sort of start to turn her life around, and she forms some really sweet friendships and that kind of thing, and I really enjoyed it from like that point onwards. So I'm really glad I stuck with it because I did have a fun time, and it is very humorous and that kind of thing. It's not always my kind of humour, but I definitely like enjoyed it by the end. Moving on to a non-fiction, I read Reckoning by Magda Szubanski, who is an actress and comedian. Family is Scottish-Polish, but they moved to Australia when she was young. She's really famous in Australia. When she came out as a lesbian, it was a very big deal in the Australian media, and this is sort of her autobiography. A lot of this is focused on the relationship she had with her father. Her father was Polish in the Second World War. He was part of the sort of resistance in Warsaw, and then he moved to Scotland for some military training, met her mother, and actually never ended up seeing his parents again. And essentially, he refers to himself jokingly as an assassin. A lot of this is sort of reckoning with the legacy of his wartime experiences and the type of person that it left him being, and the way that that sort of impacted their family life, and a lot of that. So there's a lot of this that is like, she loves her father very much, but sort of many things about the way that he carried himself through life and that kind of thing had a real effect on her and her siblings. And so there's sort of a reckoning with that, but there's also like a reckoning with like his actual actions during the war, and understanding what that would have been like, and the way that that also kind of hung over the family as well. I don't know, like, so much of this made me think about a lot of things, and I found that aspect of it, it's weird to say like compelling, because it's really grappling with some like real things, but like she sort of comes to an understanding as this goes on that so much of sort of the pressures and stuff that were put on them as children comes back to like this person who is deeply traumatized by this event that they can never really fully talk about honestly, because it was just so harrowing, and how much of that was him trying to set them up so that if anything like that ever happened again, they would survive, which is a really heavy topic to grapple with. So I will definitely be like, trigger warnings there, please, like, go into that with knowledge. At the same time, there is a lot of this that is just very interesting exploration of like how she made it into the showbiz, and also like her understanding of her sexuality and coming out and doing that personally, but then also doing that publicly, and what that was like. So that was really fascinating. So this is one of those where, because I don't really know anything about her before this, and I'm not really a fan of her work. Like, I don't dislike her. I just genuinely I think I've seen her in Babe, and that's about it. So there was a lot of this which, like, I probably would have ranked this higher if I was like invested in her as a person, but there was a lot of this that as an outsider I found very interesting to read. Another one that is definitely going to think about a lot is Small Beauty by Jia Wilson Yang. This is a very small little read, but it gave me so much to think about. We follow May, who is coping with the death of her cousin, and she is sort of living in his house after he's passed away, and she's thinking a lot about her relationship with the other trans women in her life, and sort of just about her life in general. The first section is like from May's perspective. We get other sections that are mixed perspectives. I found the final section in this is the one that really gave me a lot to think about. Like this book ends in a way that like I feel like I'm still thinking of. It's still with me. There is just a lot in this that is really like, introspective, and it's made me think inwards as well as like reading May think inwards, and there's so much about like messy interpersonal relationships and people who pass away and like all of this and like protecting each other and like death and loss and like queerness and family, but then also like queer family and like bonds between people. And because it's told in this sort of like web-like fashion, like some parts we are moving sort of like the first part we sort of like moving backwards in time, and then we have another section where we have multiple people's perspectives, so you can sort of piece some angles and some gaps in, and then this like final section sort of culminates in this scene at this like lake that weirdly reminds me of in The Miseducation of Cameron Post. That ends at a lake, and they are extremely different content-wise, but this sort of like we are in a body of water and there is an openness to the ending, but also like in a way that makes you like contemplate and wonder. Like that's very much the vibe of the ending. I really liked this. I feel like I'm doing a really bad job of saying why, but I did really like it. I also read a tiny essay, and that is on being different, what it means to be a homosexual by Merle Miller. Merle Miller was an American novelist. Essentially, he was involved in like newspapers and stuff like this for a while, and essentially at one point there was this horrendously homophobic article published, and Merle Miller like absolutely lost his shit, and he was like, I am sick to fucking death of reading this goddamn awful stuff about me and my friends, and he sort of very publicly came out. And then this sort of essay that he wrote is sort of very much like about that, and like exploring like what it is like to be gay in America at that time. And it's one of those I don't have a huge amount to say on it. It's very much like a piece of history, and I really appreciated reading it and sort of getting that perspective, because you can read and read and read, but you can never really understand what like the lived experience was like. So but that's why you read and read and read, is to help try and understand. And I felt like this was sort of very much like one of those where like I've come away with like an understanding of what it would have been like for him to live his life in this way. It was an interesting little essay, and I just wanted to mention it briefly. And then finally, the last book that I read was The Transgender Issue, An Argument for Justice by Shon. This is another one that I kind of don't have a lot to say about, because I just think it was very well done. And I liked that this like really broke down like some of these argument points about that get discussed as part of the like transgender issue, hence the title, whereas actually she's like really positing it back into like this is the real world experience, this is like real people, like this is not like a theoretical concept. Like when we talk about these things, like when these things are wheeled out, this is shock tactics, this is the actual lived reality of what it is like across a bunch of different things. So like there's a chapter that is about like what it is like to exist as a trans person in Britain at the moment. There is a chapter that is about sort of like class, how class plays into it. There's this myth that like being trans is something that is like reserved for like the elite, that is this like thing, whereas actually like most trans people are working class people, and stuff like this. Like she really like breaks it down topic by topic. And I thought it was great. I don't really have a lot to say about it. You know, when you're like, you've done a great job, I feel like this is going to be really helpful. Like especially with arguments that you might like theoretically be aware of, but actually I really like it when people like give me like the solid, like here's statistics, here's what this is actually based on. You can say this as a rebuttal, but like this is the data as to why you can say that as a rebuttal. The whole thing. So I feel like this has been going on for ages. I'm going to wrap it to a close. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these. I would also really like to hear if you read anything particularly fabulous for Pride Month. Do let me know, because I will file it away and get my hands on it at some point. Otherwise, I hope you're having a really lovely day. I'll see you next time for something different.